I'm in my house doing some last minute prep work because tomorrow we start our fall schedule of the Hackberry Farm Photo School day camp. I've got people coming over in the morning and we're going to learn about wildlife photography tomorrow. And then tomorrow evening, it's going to be a workshop on night photography. But one thing you may not know about me is I'm a pretty good cook. And one of my favorite things to do, aside from teaching the day camps, is to have people come over and curate a good homemade meal for them. And so what I'm going to make tomorrow is one of my favorite recipes. It's super easy, takes a little bit of prep work, maybe 5-10 minutes, not much at all. And then you can start cooking it overnight in your slow cooker. And then when you wake up in the morning, it's ready to go. The recipe I'll be making are for pulled pork barbecue sandwiches. And I could put this thing on my smoker and let it smoke for a long time. And that's the traditional way of doing it. I like the slow cooker method again because it's a little bit of prep work. And then you put it in the slow cooker. I go to bed tonight, let it cook in the slow cooker all night. When I get up in the morning, it'll be ready to go. But this recipe is so easy to make. And so once we make it tonight, we'll just keep it warm tomorrow. And then tomorrow afternoon, we're going to put on some nice soft onion rolls and put a little coleslaw on it. And then it'll be ready to eat just like that right out of the pan. Okay, let's get started on this recipe. I went earlier today to our local grocery store and picked up a shoulder roast. Now, these things are called a lot of different things. They're called a pork shoulder roast, Boston butt, pork butt, and essentially they're the same cut. Now, don't be confused. The actual pork butt is the ham. And so these cuts of meat come from the shoulder. And this pork shoulder roast is a perfect cut to do this recipe with because once it cooks low and slow for 8 hours, this thing will come out tender. In fact, when we pull the bone out tomorrow, the bone comes out with no resistance and come out pretty clean. I'll show you that when this thing is finished cooking. But in the meantime, this is a pretty easy prep. So I'm going to take the pork shoulder roast. I've had it sitting out behind me on the countertop getting to room temperature. And then I'm just going to sprinkle it with 3 ingredients: salt, pepper, garlic powder. That's it. I'm not going to overdo it. Just salt, just season it lightly, because the other flavors I'll add to this recipe are going to help bring out the flavor in this pork and make these sandwiches really good. Okay, got the seasoning on there. I'm just going to rub this thing around on the pan just a little bit, get the seasoning on all the pieces of exposed meat. Again, you don't have to be perfect. I mean, I got the garlic powder on a little bit thick in a couple of spots, but I'm going to kind of balance that out by just sort of moving it around. You don't have to rub it a lot. But here's one thing you need to know, though. This is pork, and of course, we need to take care of safe food handling practices. So as soon as I'm done, since I've been handling this with my bare hands, I'm going to wash my hands in really hot, soapy water and try to kill any bacteria that may be on this meat. Okay, I'm all washed up. Pork shoulder sitting here waiting to go in the crock pot. The next thing I'm going to do is take a white onion and then rough chop it and just into big chunks, and I'll use that as the base and put it in the bottom of this crock pot. Again, on this rough chopping, you don't have to be real delicate about it. There's no set pattern on how big the pieces ought to be. I'm just going to try to get them where once they render down, they'll be fairly small. There'll be slivers in there. You'll still be able to taste them, but these onions should give this recipe a whole lot of flavor when we're done. So I'm just going to go ahead and take these onions, put them in the crock pot in the bottom, and then I'll go to my next step. Okay, I've got the onions in the crock pot. Now I'm going to put the pork shoulder in here, but I'm going to put the pork shoulder with the fat side to the top. That way, as this thing cooks, that fat will soak down through that meat and make it really, really, really tender. I'm telling you, you won't believe how tender this is going to be in the morning. Okay, we've got our seasoned up pork shoulder. We're just going to place it right on top of the onions again with the fat side up. This thing is seasoned. Onions are smelling great. This thing is going to be so tasty when we get this thing out. So I've got the onions in. I've got the seasoned pork shoulder in. I've got the fat side up. But we've got one more thing we need to add. One more ingredient we need to add. Okay, we got the pork shoulder in there. We've got the fat side up so that fat will render down through the pork shoulder. But we've actually got a couple more ingredients left. One is, you can use whatever kind you like, but I like the Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce. We're going to add a little bit of barbecue sauce into this mixture. Just right on top, maybe about 3/4 of a cup, not a whole lot. Just to give a little bit of flavor. We'll save the rest for the recipe when it's done. But the secret ingredient is Dr. Pepper. Now I've got Dr. Pepper Zero. You can use regular Dr. Pepper. This is a 15.9, or no, 16.9 ounce bottle. We don't need all of this. We're going to use about a can's worth, about 12 ounces worth to put in this recipe. Now I don't know what it is about the flavor of the Dr. Pepper that adds to this recipe, but once you mix the onions in with the flavor of the pork, the flavor of the barbecue sauce and this Dr. Pepper, it's absolutely a brilliant recipe. I don't know who came up with it. It's one I found a long time ago, but it's going to make some great pulled pork sandwiches that we're going to have for lunch tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and pour this in, and then once I get it poured in, then I just set the crock pot and then let it go overnight. This whole mixture doesn't look like much now, but once it's done in the morning, it's just going to be, again, flavorful. It's going to leave the whole house smelling good. And I can't wait for my guests to try it. So the very last step we need to do tonight is I'm going to set the crock pot on a low temperature, set it for an 8-hour cook time. This particular crock pot I have, once it reaches the 8 hours, let's say if I oversleep or something in the morning, which I don't plan to, if I oversleep, it'll just default to warm. So that way it'll keep it warm until I'm ready to come shred it all up. So we're going to put this to bed tonight, let it cook overnight, and in the morning we'll come back and see what we've got. I just woke up, but there's really no reason to set the alarm. The smell of this pork shoulder wafting through the house was enough to get me up this morning. And so this thing is done. It's cooked for 8 hours. It's all sitting in there in its own Dr. Pepper and barbecue sauce juices. It's ready to go. So now the only tool I need are 2 forks, because I'm gonna reach in there and just start shredding it apart and just cutting it into small chunks. And that way it's ready to serve on the rolls later on today for lunch. Now here's the amazing part. If you watch when I take my fork, look how tender that is. It just shreds right apart. Somewhere in there ought to be a bone I gotta find. Hopefully I'll have some hungry workshop participants and they'll be ready to eat this up and enjoy it like I know they will.